Nothing like a great energetic jingle to get everything started. That jingle made for us by Brandy. Thank you very much, Brandy. And welcome to everybody to episode 2 of the Global Online Content Series. We're really delighted to have you here from all over the world. Thank you for joining. I know in some parts of the world, this is really early. In other parts, it's really late. Remember, it's also available. This entire discussion will be available for catch up on redtech.pro. So let me tell you how we started the Global Online Content Series as RedTech. We surveyed over 30 program and content managers from around the world and asked them, what are you getting lots of information about and what are you feeling slightly challenged about that you're not learning enough about? So we didn't want to do the stuff they already know. And they said, well, they gave us 6 topics essentially. And they said, if you can do insights on this from experts around the world, we will tune in. We want to know more. We'll ask questions. We'll engage. And that's why Global Online Content Series started. Just an apology, you won't see Phil Dowse today because he unfortunately is taken ill. So Phil Dowse from Australia is not part of the panel today, but there's a big responsibility on you as the viewer. This is happening because of you. And that is to ask the questions we fail to ask. It's not like we've covered everything here. We have some ideas what the big questions are, but there might be other questions we ignore or forget or just skirt around. Or maybe when the panelists are speaking, they're not directly addressing an issue that you think is critical. That's where you come in. We've got a comments possibility for you. We'll flash it up on screen so that the panelists can take the question or the comment or the input or the inquiry that you're making. And don't look for a particular segment for it. It happens all the time. So do it as it arises in your mind while you're listening to the expert panelists that we have for this session. Now, very importantly, this panel would not be possible without the support of SoundStack. Big thank you to Rocky, Michael, and Scott. And now, here's your moderator, Gary Krantz.
Thank you, Omar. And welcome, everybody, to the second installment of the RedTech Global Online Content Series. The topic today is audience growth and development. We have a stellar panel from all over the world to share their insights and observations and some predictions, we hope. We have Carolyn Gilbert, who is founder and president of New Voodoo, based out of Cincinnati here in the United States. We have Tapas Sen, our chief content officer at Platonics in India, and Ross Winters, who is the director of programming for Tapas Sen Media in Vancouver. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let all of you do a brief intro of who you are and what you do, and then we'll go right into the session. So why don't we start with Carolyn?
Hi, Gary. Thank you. I'm Carolyn Gilbert. I founded New Voodoo Media Services in 2010 after a stint as vice president of research and inside sales at Tribune Company. And for 27 years, I was also the founder and president of what became Clear Channel's Critical Mass Media. I started way back when with 4 little interviewers and ended up with 700 employees. I've been doing radio research since 1980, a long time. I've been looking at research, ratings, people, and the medium. Radio is my passion, my love, and plan to love it forever. Gary, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Ross, why don't you go?
All right. Thanks, Gary. And hello and good morning, at least it is from the Pacific time zone. I'm with a company called Tapas Sen Media, director of programming, have been for the past 8 years. I had a similar position with Chorus Entertainment before that. But basically, my time in radio mostly has been spent as a program director in a number of markets, including Toronto and Vancouver. At Tapas Sen, we have 51 stations all in Western Canada. All but 3 are FM. And I work with stations on strategy and talent development, ratings growth, launches, rebrands, and that kind of thing.
Terrific. Tapas?
Hi, I'm just coming out of a 30-year stint with one of India's leading radio brands, Radio Mirchi. We have about 79 stations across the country, a total listenership of about 43 million. Last 4 or 5 years has been, or rather 7, 8 years has been radio plus digital. And now I'm part of a Zurich-based company called Platonics, where I'm again looking at content itself. It's a purely digital environment.
Terrific. Well, thank you for all your time today. And I want to encourage all the viewers of this webinar to offer your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. So the purpose of this webinar is to address a reality that all of us in the radio business are facing right now. If you can put up those slides, please. So thank you to Larry Rosen at Edison Media Research who provided these slides. You can see right now that the share of time spent listening to AM and FM broadcast radio is decreasing more among 18 to 34s, 21% versus 35, 54s, 18% or 13%. So they are literally leaving the room faster than anybody else and not slowing down. Where are they going? Next slide, please. They're going to streaming. They're going to YouTube. Look at the 1334 line. They're going to podcasts. And what's not shown on here is TikTok. So I have my own personal focus group that I use because I have a couple of millennials and Gen Zs in my family, and I'm sure many of you also do. And just a couple of comments from that group. This generation wants the Cliff Notes version in 3 minutes tops on a TikTok video. It's hard to engage people now because there's a niche for everyone that's available now. Mainstream truly doesn't exist anymore. These are the words of a millennial. Why would this generation listen to radio when they can find something geared towards their interest? That's the way it's all going, out of the words of babes. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Carolyn first. Maybe she can provide some observations on those comments and those slides and talk about her work in attracting younger demos to radio.
Well, Larry is a great researcher, and he's right. The challenge is, I hear people, I've heard programmers say, well, when they hit 25, they'll come back. And it's sort of like buggy whip manufacturers a century ago saying, oh, this car is a phase, they'll come back to the horse and buggy because that's what we use. There is a long tail of content now. Radio was the only game in town. For most of my life, if you wanted some curated entertainment, turn on the radio. And the word there too was entertainment. The industry itself has gone through sort of a perfect storm of awful with high leverage. And the barrier to entry that radio had is no longer in existence. We've got streamers. I can start a radio station on this little computer this afternoon if I want to and provide content. So the thought is, if radio wants to attract anybody, we've got to do something unique and compelling. We've homogenized ourselves to death and cut costs to the bone. I live across the street from Procter & Gamble, and when under attack, P&G would not eliminate research and marketing. But radio's done that, at least in the US. And should we want to survive as an industry and attract people, we've got to know what they want, provide what they want, and deliver content that's compelling, unique, and entertaining.
Thank you. We could talk about the problem all day long, but this is about providing solutions and insight. Ross, this is obviously US-based research. Tell us the story in Canada. Are you facing those same challenges? And more importantly, you have a verifiable track record in innovation in bringing younger listeners to the radio. Tell us about some of your tactics.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And it's absolutely the same picture in Canada as the slides that we just saw. And I've got a couple of youngsters in the household too, and they love 5-second ads and ads that they can make go away. We can't do that in radio, or at least we haven't figured it out yet. But I'm going to give you an example of one of our stations. So I think, throwing some of the old rules out the door makes a lot of sense. I mean, the radio playbook, how long has it been around? So as an industry, we have revolved, but in many ways we still seem to act the same way. And I'm just talking about the product. So, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are some things that make radio unique. And in particular, I think anyway, it's live and local, in particular local. And that's an edge we have, assuming that local matters. And maybe I'll ask Carolyn in a minute if she sees research where actually local matters or it doesn't. But, throw out the old parts of the playbook. Radio gets very cluttered with messages. We're a microphone. We talk a lot about ourselves, whereas we should be more, at least in my opinion, a mirror reflecting what's on the listener's agenda. So the example is a station of ours in Edmonton, Alberta, Now Radio, and it's a great example. We've thrown most of the old rules out on that station when it launched in 2010. We run considerably less commercials than you'd typically expect on any radio station, so that our hosts now have time to engage with the audience. The music is hot AC. It's aimed at people, leaning women in their 30s and their 40s. We still play a lot of music each hour, but our hosts initiate conversations and listeners join in, and we're able to do that because we play less commercials. I know if there's any general managers listening to that, they're probably covering their ears on the less commercials part. But we've also created a tribe of loyal listeners, and we don't call them listeners. They're called Now Family. And we don't do typical promotions. We do Now Family events, such as the haunted house every year at Halloween, which is built right into their own studios and into their own building and built by the staff there. Thousands of Now Family show up. We don't have liners or promos. Hosts promote the Now Family events organically. And the station does not do sales promotions. That's not all of our stations at all, but that's this particular station. But the biggest component of our station is just really, really good hosts. And we essentially have morning shows around the clock. And they're people who can tell stories and have conversations. I think that is key for radio. The station's been number one for the most part, really, since 2010. And the other thing I'll add is that it's a big investment, because the station markets heavily outdoor and digital, and has for most of those 10, 12 years, and refreshes 3 or 4 times a year. So not a cheap format to run, but there's one example where this station is doing exceptionally well, throws out the playbook and targets a younger audience.
Terrific. Tapas, Mirchi is an iconic brand in India, and you were a big part of that development and growth, and now looks like you're about to do it again. Can you talk to us and our audience about how you've dealt with that issue, how you've dealt with the exit of the younger demographics to our competitive audio entertainment?
Okay, so I think one of the mistakes perhaps we ourselves have been making is when we talk about radio, actually think about it. Radio is a device, right? And therefore that definition no longer holds, because people are now listening to what we used to call radio, even on their mobile phones or wherever. So the first step, I think, is to step out of defining ourselves as people who provide content through one device. And we've been doing that because, the second point very related to this is that I think we should really, really stop trying to help radio survive. Now, that seems to be a very, very a massive statement, but I'll tell you what I mean. If we ever try and make radio survive just by itself, it will not work. So, Gary, you asked me, how are we keeping the youngsters? we are not losing youngsters. And I'll tell you why. The reason is that nothing now that we do is only radio, right? So the entire programming is very, very intimately integrated into our social media content, we have our own app, into what we're doing on the app, and activation. So in fact, activation is a big thing, and I'll probably talk about it a little later in the show. But right now, all content that we do, is completely integrated with what we are doing on a social media. And we have about 157 presenters, and of those, about 40 presenters have more than 1 million following on the social media. Another 40 to 50 are about to hit their 1 million following, right? So they are major influencers. They start the day by probably making a statement which immediately reaches out to these huge number of people. And then the entire program on air is to discuss that. So they're constantly moving platforms from radio to social media, from radio to maybe some activation which is happening on ground, from radio to wherever. So pure radio, I think we need to really get out of the thinking that, hey, this is radio. We are no more radio. We are content. And content is eternal. It doesn't matter what device they use to receive or to listen to my presenters, as long as they're listening to them, as long as they're listening to my ideas. So yeah, that's what we've done, and it's so far we're having a great run.
Wonderful. Carolyn, you're nodding your head.
Yes, because they're both talking about compelling content. That's exactly what will draw young people. And of course, radio is not transmitters sitting in fields. It is not a device. It has to be. I mean, I have one radio in my house and it's in my guest room. I listen to radio all the time, but it's on my computer or it's on my speaker. One of the challenges in the US is our rating system. And we've got stations in America not doing, it's all about the credit. It's all about the ratings. And we've got stations in the US not doing total line reporting, deciding to do separate commercials so they don't get full credit for all their listening. So much of the business in the US is not what these two gentlemen are talking about. It's about playing a ratings game. It's about making the number. It's about cutting expenses instead of providing the wonderful content that draws people. It is all about the content. Ross was talking about, the questions. I talk to program directors and it makes me nuts sometimes because the questions are all about us. No, the questions should be about them, about the listener, about the user. How do they use us? What are they doing when they're using us? How can we integrate better into their lives? How can we help them? They don't care about your slogan. They really don't. And so ask them about them and engage with the content that these two gentlemen are talking about. And that is the win. That is the solution.
Ross, Ross and Tapas, is this just a US problem, or are you seeing it in your markets as well? The ratings game.
Yeah, I'll just come to the ratings. But before that, I just wanted to react to something Carolyn said. Of course, it is 100%, about good content. But what we are trying to do here is we are trying to make sure that you don't even, that the integration is so aggressive. Now, let me give an example. If you listen to the breakfast show, you will not understand anything if you have not checked out the guy's handle in the morning, because he has spoken a lot about something in the morning. So it will not make sense to you. So it is integrated to an aggressive extent that, hey, listen, if you're not following it, go check out my handle, what we talk about, it is just an extension of that entire conversation, which then again dovetails probably into, another post. So I'm saying we've integrated it in a very, very aggressive way. On ratings, yes. Okay, so US is probably one of the most advanced markets as far as ratings is concerned. In India, and I'll tell you a very funny anecdote on this, actually, because a few years back it happened, because, ratings, I think everywhere they have the problem of credibility. So this particular company, which was actually, we were all subscribing to it. So there was this particular brand, it's a well-known organization, and it's a FMCG company, and they launched a cooking oil, and which they said is the best cooking oil for the heart. And they have a huge advertising budget. So they approached all the radio stations and they said, we want 20 minutes of pure heartbeat, no music, no talk. 20 minutes of pure heartbeat, and in the background there is just a whispering of the brand of the product, right? And all radio stations except one um, agreed disagreed to it. There was only one radio station which took up the offer, right? So when the ratings came, everybody looked at those 20 minutes, and you'll be surprised that the listenership in those 20 minutes was hardly any different from what it was earlier, before those 20 minutes, after those 20 minutes, a week earlier, and things like that. So that kind of was the death knell for credibility of ratings. We still have them, but I think most of these spenders, right, from the Levers and Procter Gamble, etc., for radio, they mostly don't rely on ratings anymore. I don't know if it's good or bad, but they rely largely on a certain street sense, because there are only that many radio stations in India, and more or less the media planners have an idea as to what is doing well, what is, what's good in which state, etc., etc. So yeah, if we had a well-developed rating system like the US, probably it would continue. But here it's on a very, very weak wicket, and it's not very utilitarian in any case at this point of time.
And Tapas,
Sorry, go ahead, Gary.
Go. We'll go over to you a second, Ross. How do you find these? You've obviously built it, but then you need people to come. How are you letting this group, these younger demographics, know what you're doing, and are there are specific tactics that you could share that can work for broadcasters, other broadcasters around the world?
Gary, you have to realize, the moment you have 1 million people, following you in the morning, the breakfast dog wakes up and he says, good morning. And it's reached out to about 1 million people and says, today, I'm going to talk about what the government did last week by sending in the police into the university. I think it's terrible, and that's where the conversation starts. Is, all right, guys, I'm switching off from here now, catch me on 983, and then he will actually start mid-sentence. Hey, Gary, you were just saying that, you don't like the idea of the government sending the police, but they had to because it had become a law and order situation. So it is a seamless conversation happening. So the people who are coming in are actually people who have been following this guy, and therefore the demographic anyway on the social media is very, very young. And they are coming into radio on the back of this. So that's what's really working out very well.
Interesting. Ross, you had a comment?
Well, I was just going to jump in on the ratings, and I know we don't want to spend a lot of time on ratings, but in Canada, our rating systems are similar to those in the US. We have 3 different methodologies. We have meter, we have diary, and we have next day recall. And they all have their flaws. Meters can be a big problem in markets. We had a radio station in Vancouver that was #1 for a year and a half. And then because we lost a couple of panelists, heavy tuner panelists, we dropped to #9. And we could see it coming. We could see it coming because we could see somebody was 54 years old and they were going to age out, and somebody had been on the panel for 6.5 years and the maximum is 5, but they let them stay longer because of COVID. So we kind of saw that happening. And so though that's unrealistic, and maybe the station wasn't #1 to begin with, but it also wasn't #9, but it's unfair to the advertisers. And it's a real problem. So that's really my comment on ratings. I do wish that Phil had been on this call, because I know they're doing some interesting things in Australia where they're converging, streaming and meters and all tuning into one. And I'm quite interested in that. But did you want to talk about a couple more strategies? Actually, can I just ask quickly, Tapas, one of your hosts is on the air, and they're speaking about like the topic that you just spoke about. If I'm joining in the middle and I don't quite understand, where else, like what other social platforms are they using at that time to have the same conversation?
Oh, okay, so we have 3 platforms. One is the presenter's personal handle. Then the station has its own handle, which largely mirrors what's going on at that point of time. And third, of course, there is the mobile website is there, but that's not really the weak one. So forget about that. It's just these two largely. The handle which the channel has. And at that point of time, if you were there, it is just talking about the breakfast show. Of course, it has other things also, but that's the one which is really active. And the jog. So even if I missed out, I can definitely catch up on that. And of course, typically, like all good radio presenters, he's constantly doing a recall. He's constantly saying, "Hey, this is what we're discussing today," just to bring people in. And just like questions are popping up on the chat box here, he's also answering questions which are happening on the handle. People are nowhere near the radio, so he's actually got two different buckets of audience. Except that he's not typing into the chat box. He's just speaking them out. He says, "Hey, Ross just messaged," and he says, "Hey, on the part of the government, it was not a bad decision. I think the students were really unruly." So, and I'll read out your comment, and then I'll give the answer on air.
Well, go ahead, Ross.
I'll just add, so similar to that, a couple of tactics that we employ, especially at what we call our high engagement stations that have conversations with their listeners ongoing. And so a listener can join the conversation through phone, through text, or through the app. And on the app, in some of our stations, we use a platform called Commotion that brings in all the responses, whether it's text or from app, into one feed, and the host sees it, but so do the listeners. So if you're on the app, it's kind of a funny thing. Listeners can watch the conversation going on the app, and they can also speak amongst themselves. And so there's a conversation going on, and then there's a conversation within a conversation. The other tactic which we've employed is TV. So Now TV or Today TV on a number of our stations. And these are where the listener goes to the website. So if they want to stream the station, the choice is stream the regular way with audio, or they can click on Now TV and listen and watch the hosts. And we're actually blown away by the total listening hours that we get from Now TV, whereas almost 1 in 4 total streaming comes from people viewing and listening to the stream, but through Now TV. So there's a couple of tactics there, Gary.
Yeah, I'm hearing some consistencies here. Listening to you and Tapas, we're going to go to Carolyn next. But you're talking about Now TV. Tapas is talking about all social media, all distribution platforms. Carolyn, New Voodoo is also a marketing company, not only a research company.
And a digital company as well, yes.
Digital company as well. And you have some of the most iconic radio stations as your clients that were dominant in the youth demos for a period of time and still here. What are you doing and what are you seeing as a way to get to those listeners who you said left the reservation long time ago and trying to get them to come back?
Well, from a marketing standpoint, we're in the US, we're playing a ratings game, and the ratings game is played because of money. It's the metered markets that we're working with by and large, not the diary markets. And those are the two Nielsen methodologies. And unlike India, ratings are vitally important in terms of spot buys. The young end, you'll see we used to call it PPDV, the person per diary value, that no longer diaries. But they're not getting the young end even into the rating system so that each person there is weighted to a ridiculous level. I mean, the system is horribly flawed, but when we market to very specific targets where we can determine who these people are, where they are, and narrow the field.
How do you do that, and how do you market to them?
We do
without giving it up.
But we do social and direct mail. And the way we do it is a very, very thorough diary meter analysis that we work with a partner on. And there are just ways to target this, and we do it, and we can do it. And instead of the buckshot of a market-wide direct mail, we can have impact. Instead of $150,000 in New York, we can do something for $25,000 in a direct mail standpoint and find the people with the meters. Now, this does not draw young people to the radio. What I hear these guys talking about is exactly right, because what they're doing is establishing relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's all about, engagement and relationships. And it's device agnostic. Engaging them through social. I mean, what they're talking about is not what I do. What my marketing does is try and get the ratings to go up. What my research does is try and find that compelling content when a station's not asking about their slogan. I mean, we're number one is not draw people to a radio station. Can you imagine walking into a restaurant and having the maitre d' say, we're the number one restaurant on this street, instead of saying, how can I help you?
Yeah.
I mean,
we're all number one at something.
We're all number one at something. Yeah. Yes.
Well,
So
we have a question from our audience, and I think it's great. It's from Sebastian Negre. And his question is, are radio station apps really attractive for young people when there are such platforms such as Spotify, Apple, etc., which we saw on the slide before, is the number one way for 13 to 34-year-olds are consuming audio. Do you want to speak to that? Who wants to take that question? The question of the apps.
I can try. So here's another shocker. Our radio app does not have any music. In fact, the app is a completely different product. It is not the radio product. So in fact, that's also on account of the fact that we have huge copyright litigations going on. And it's probably one of the most, we've seen the litigations on copyright happening across the world. But I think in India, it's the most ferocious, and it's really terrible. But anyway, that aside, we've turned it into a strategy. So what happens is that on the app, you have all the GOCS. And these GOCS are mandated to post videos, very, very interesting videos about themselves, about whatever their interests are, whatever they were spoken on the show, at least once or twice a day. Now, this entire app becomes then a repository of some of the best videos, and they're all short, mostly short form videos. So it's like a TikTok of a set of people who you really like. Right, so it's not just the presenter of Delhi, but also the presenter from other cities who's posting his or her videos there. And so what happens is, the reason why they go on to the station app is because, like I said, it offers another product altogether, which is largely videos done by these interesting people who normally on air, they just hear them talk. But here's something he's presenting his view on the car rally that happened yesterday morning, or the concert that's coming up. So it's mostly video offering on the app. There is zero music.
A little different for us. There is music if you choose to stream the station, and that's really I think why we have apps. I'd be interested to hear, Carolyn, if there's any research on that. But I believe that I remember Jacob's survey showing that listeners' preference is for station apps rather than aggregators. But so we're on aggregators, all of ours, like Radio Player Canada, and of course there's iHeart. And we all have our own station apps. I know some companies in Canada got rid of their own particular station apps. And I'm glad we did not, because in our own analytics on the back end, as far as streaming goes, we can see it's probably north of 95% of our streaming comes through our own apps rather than, one of the aggregators. So I don't know if that answers the question.
In terms of the Jacobs data, I just like to caution that's from radio station databases. Mm-hmm. So they're actives, they're radio actives. So the certain data needs to be filtered through that understanding that, these are radio actives. So you can't look at radio trends. It really depends on the market and on the app. If all you've got is streaming and a blast of something and commercials on your app, it's not compelling. Again, it's compelling content. You know, what Tapas is talking about, where you have engagement between your listeners and your hosts, and where you have issues and interchange and relationship, those kinds of apps perform very well. What don't perform well are the apps that are just sort of, we threw something up there and we've got some streaming.
Yeah.
And really, again, it's about the content.
Yeah, I agree. Our Commotion app that we use in a few markets are the most active of all of our apps, because the conversation is going on and it's scrolling up, and what you see right now is going to be different than what you see 60 seconds from now as the conversation continues and people weigh in.
Right.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. Boyd Leader, are radio reports such as research adapting quick enough to the constant changes and challenges that face radio? And what are your summer and fall plans for Edmonton, Ross? Please.
Yes. Okay. Let me just lay that whole thing out. I worked with Boyd for many years, and Boyd's a competitor now in one of our markets. So there's the question. But you know, our radio support systems, such as research adapting quick enough. Again, I'm interested in hearing others on this. But you know, we use various forms of research, including, you know, focus groups, you know, library testing of music, you know, call out for music if it's a current or recurrent based radio station. And then, of course, in-depth studies on our own markets, our own stations. As an example, we never make a strategic decision based on what the ratings say. So if we see one of our stations having a slump in ratings, even, you know, and it's been 6 months, 9 months, a year, we're not going to make a big strategic decision based on that. We're going to do research, and we're going to do market research and see what's actually happening in the market. We did this a few years ago with a classic rock station. Then there's a couple other rock stations in the market, and we were third among the rock stations. Our only audience in ratings was 50 to 54-year-old men. And so we did research, and it reflected the exact same thing. So, okay, we changed format and went much younger. But Boyd, you know, and we would never use ratings to make a decision. We would use research. So for your question, I think that research is adapting. Research is audience feedback, and however you get the audience feedback, you know, you need feedback. You need to hear from your listeners.
We talk about that. That's great, Ross. What other ways are all of you getting audience feedback? How? And I keep coming back to, if we build it, will they come? No, you have to tell them that you're here. Carolyn, do you want to talk about some of that?
Yeah, we've changed methodologies. We've changed our opinions. We've changed a lot of things in the last 10 to 15 years. You know, I had call centers with 700 seats back in 2008. Yeah, if I don't know your number, I'm not answering. You know, I mean, and our thought was, as long as Arbitron plays diaries that way, we'll have call centers. I now do twice the work with 17 people than I did with 750 people, because we have access to so many people everywhere. But also, we used to say, if you're doing focus groups, you don't know your business. And I'm going to say right now, we don't know our business. And we have an online platform that allows us to do IDIs, one-on-ones, and really get the language. I mean, if you want to talk to young people, speak in their language and speak to them. So we have a bunch of ways to get feedback. We're using AI to diagnose verbatims. It used to take weeks to sit and look at verbatim comments in a perceptual. It was annoying. People said they didn't know. Now we can get, in their own words, in their own misspelling, what they're saying. And I can now do in 5 minutes, actually less time than that, what it took a human being weeks to do using AI technology. So we are doing a lot of things in a lot of different directions. We have, because of economics, we now have what we're calling the ASAP study, which focus on a couple of key areas for $9,500. And 3 weeks, $9,500, get the answer about that morning show, get the answer about your music mix. Single or double focus on 300 samples. We have a 400 hook OMT that is also under $10,000, and there are people out there still charging $40,000 when they had to have people come into an auditorium. You don't have to do that anymore. We now have the ability to clean data. I mean, I personally go through all of our music tests and throw out 30% of whoever's there because I don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're geocoded, or they're not your P1 if they don't know half your music. Go away. We didn't have that luxury when we had in-person AMTs, or we were struggling to fill a call-out sample. Everything we do is clean, and the research we have, I feel more confident in than I ever have before. And we can offer the tool that the station needs to solve the problem. What's keeping them up at night? We can focus narrowly and give a good answer to that question.
Yeah, it's all online, and it's much more robust samples.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about talent development. And when I say talent development, I'm talking in front of the mic and behind the mic. Tapas, can you talk a little bit about where you're finding the next generation of on-air talent, where you're finding the next generation of management? Back in those of us who've been around a minute, remember that, in the late 60s and the early 70s, the FM station was probably a beautiful music station or something like that. And then one day they said, hey, why don't we give the kid with the ponytail, the wheel? And they started playing, Jimi Hendrix records, and the rest is history, right? Yeah. Do you see that happening? Are you doing that? Are you putting the right people in the chairs, both in front and behind the mic, to be able to speak and attract to younger listeners?
So, Gary, the short answer to your question is that we are not looking at on-air talent at all. We are looking at social media talent. So here's an interesting, again, anecdote. In Calcutta, the number one jock, the presenter, okay, she was 7 days away from losing her job. Okay, and because on air she is, if I may use the word, she's very sad, right? She's a very, very below average talent. But she went wild on the social media. People were just clamoring for what Carolyn calls compelling content, right? So we brought her back after a short break. And my God, the entire population of her following started listening to her on air. And today the listenership in that city is far above, and they have a poor number two. She's a number one, and she continues to be a very unorthodox radio talent. She doesn't have a great voice. She's not a smooth speaker. Her pronunciation is her command over the language is at best average. She mixes too many languages, but who am I to argue with success? There are just so many people who just want to consume her content. So what we've decided is we've turned it around. We've said, okay, fine, let's look at people who are producing good content on social media, and then let's just get them on radio. Okay, of course, with certain amount of basic training, etc. And that's worked out very well. Like somebody asked, where did this person get that 1 million following to begin with? Yes, in most of the cases, it is organic because, they started off with radio. It has taken them 3-4 years. But now we don't have that kind of time. Now, if somebody leaves, we have to look for somebody who's a TikTok star, right? Because that person will also shine on the app, on his or her personal handle. And therefore, there is so much of osmosis, of audience that gradually comes in. And this audience are all 100% very young audience.
Mm-hmm. Ross?
And I love what Tapas just said. So I'll take it from a different angle. But recruitment has been a huge challenge for us. And and recruiting more on the on-air, the talent side. A couple things we do in our company is, we noticed a couple of years ago that the bench strength for program directors was light as an industry, and even in our own company. So we developed a PD mentor program, and we had 15 people go through the first PD mentor program in our company, and there's a structure to it, and a number of our leaders who are participating in that with those who are in the program. And it lasted eight or 9 months, and then we just finished the second one. Of the first group of 15, 5 are now PDs in our company. So, that was very helpful for ourselves to grow from within, because like I said off the top, we believe there's the bench is light. So on the heels of that program, and you asked about management, we have just begun a general GM mentor program, working very similar to the PD mentor program. We've got 15 or so people in it. There's a structure to it. Our leaders take part in teaching it. So that's a couple of ways that we're training PDs and management. On the talent side, it's tough. It's really tough. Even the schools, like the enrollment in the broadcast schools, is way down from what it was a few years ago. So finding talent, but I really agree with what has been said by Tapas. We need to find on-air talent in places other than other radio stations. But we do use a couple of people in our group who are very talented on-air hosts, who also like the challenge of coaching other on-air people. So again, we put a structure to it. We set them up with on-air people that we believe have, huge potential, and so we do some organic coaching that way.
I agree with you, Ross. That's unfortunate that Phil Dowse couldn't be here. Omar and I spoke to him last evening, and he made a very interesting point about Australia, where radio is doing fantastic, and he talked about using and employing a strategy of podcasters and bringing them into the radio side of things, where it's an absolute strategy across the board in Australia. He did mention India also, Tapas. Maybe you could talk about this very big bench and universe of talent out there in a different medium, which it is podcasting, and is that a viable pool to swim in when looking for talent?
So, unlike the West, podcast is still at a slightly nascent stage in India. It's growing exponentially, but our baseline itself, our starting point, has been so low and so late that it's still taking some time. So unless the podcasts are being done by celebs or being done by people who are somewhat known, most of the podcasts kind of end up in the long tail. So that's a challenge that we are facing, because podcasts generally throw up very, very good talent. There is no question about that. But we are looking at it. It's literally the number 2 place to go to if you can't find the right people on the social media platform. The other problem is that all social media influencers are very expensive. Very, very expensive. They're far more expensive than on-air talent. So if you want to get somebody who has 1 million following to do a show for you and to carry it on even before and after the show, it costs a packet. And also, these are very, very temperamental people. So the old school of loyalty and building an entire set of people who are just following you wherever you are, that sort of is something that we often struggle with, Gary. But on a different note, I don't know if I just wanted to bring up this particular point on activation. So is this a good time or maybe later?
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to one question, and then we're going to do a wrap up. Let me get to the next topic, and then we can probably come back to you, Tapas. There's a category here that we haven't talked about, and that's advertisers. I'm going to go to Carolyn with this. What can we do to keep advertisers interested in radio versus all of the other ways that are now being presented to them?
Well, I mean, I remember my first program directors meeting, and there was a chart. You need great distribution, and you need listeners, and that will bring advertisers. Advertisers don't care about ratings. They care about butts and seats. They care about cash registers ringing. If you have compelling content that have listeners who pay attention, the advertisers will get results. And that's something that feeds upon itself. Some of the most compelling advertising that happens on podcasts, and it's not fancy commercials, and it's personal endorsements where people are buying mattresses because they trust the host. They're buying makeup because Joyce Vance tells them to. That's what advertisers care about, what works. And what works is compelling content that engages the listener and drives behavior.
But are we at a disadvantage as an industry, Carolyn, at least in the U.S., because of the ratings game? And how can we break through the ratings discussion with advertisers through these tactics that you've described?
You know what? I mean, that's where local really comes in, because local advertisers really don't care about the ratings. They care about the cash register ringing. We've got, national, we used to call them media princesses, who look at average quarter hour, and that's how they buy, and this is how deep they buy, and that's the game. And I don't know that we beat that until we beat that. I think the rating system in the U.S. is very broken. Ross talked about one person leaving. People lose a job because somebody went to the bathroom with the meters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's insane. If I use samples like this, I'd be out of business in my profession.
Mm-hmm.
So getting beyond the ratings game is a big question, and that's a question that's way above my pay grade. That's right. Something for the industry to deal with and say, hey, enough, you're killing our business. But that's not something I can answer until that's fixed, quite frankly.
Ross, in a world of first party, the competitive advantages of streaming with first person data and immediate metrics, how is your group communicating with advertisers about what you're doing beyond the ratings?
Well, that's a really good question, and I wish I could answer it. I have to speak to my sales manager, our VP of sales. We have data analytics that we use with all of our stations, and tactics that we employ to get the information that we need, to get people's information that we can then speak to and run surveys with. So I would say that's probably the best way that we're communicating, using data analytics. And most of our stations have pretty robust databases, so we're able to speak to those people individually, short surveys, things like that.
Terrific, thank you. Tapas, we have time to get to the point that you wanted to make before we move on.
But let me answer this question as well. It's an interesting point. So in India, we what is really selling, because the ratings are really not so viable, is ideas. Right. So if you go to a client, the only way you can get a share of the purse, of the wallet, is by presenting a composite multimedia idea. And people are just throwing money at great ideas. These ideas typically will have 4 components. It will have activation, it will have social media, it will have radio, and it will have personal endorsements by the presenters on their personal handles. So 4 components coming in together. There is no deal which is pure radio. In fact, let me tell you, if anybody gets a pure radio contract, okay, 25% of the contract value is deducted to add to his target. So, for example, if your target is $100, and you get a radio contract, pure radio contract for, let's say, $20, only 75% of that will be counted in your target. So everything is discouraged. Every which way we are discouraging a pure radio participation. We're saying it has to be a solution, and it has to be backed by a central idea. The central idea can have a platform in activation, in social media, in radio, or on just personal endorsements.
Consistent theme with your strategy, Tapas. Thank
Absolutely.
you. We have about 4 minutes left. I can't believe this hour flew by, and I thank all of you for that. Reminder to our online audience: you could post a question in the comments, but we're going to wrap it up by going around the room here. And asking for 3 practical ideas that our viewers can use to help them grow their audiences. Carolyn, do you want to start?
Sure. Find interesting people to be on your air. Forget about the broadcast schools. I mean, some of the most successful people I know on the air were lawyers or teachers or people who just have opinions. People who aren't scared to speak their minds. They're great on the air. Use them, develop them, especially younger people. And again, what Tapas is doing with people on social, that's exactly the right thing. And do research. Understand your audience. Understand what works for them and ask about them, not us. They don't care about our slogans. They just don't. And they don't care about the midday guy who just reads the cards in between the records. They don't know him. They don't care. Find out what they're doing and how we can relate to them. We've been doing it in the wrong direction for a long time. And finally, I think what Tapas said about offering solutions for your advertisers instead of putting a canned spot in the middle of a 9-minute set, and offering solutions is the best thing to do for your business. And talk to young people when you're in a restaurant, when you're at a party. Talk to people. That's research. It's free. Just engage with people. Find out what they need and act on it. Thank you.
Ross.
And just to Andrew Bowen, who made the comment on the comments, just reach me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to further that conversation. But the 3 things I would say, and I'm going to reinforce something that Carolyn just said, is hire talent that can talk, hire talent that can tell stories. We have a generation, in some cases, not in all cases, but we have a generation of announcers that can speak for 7 seconds at a time, because we have a generation of program directors who have coached them on that. And I'm not saying that some of that didn't work, but maybe it worked 20 years ago. So hire people who can speak, hire people who can tell stories. The second one is, as a radio company, we've said we're going to look beyond 25 to 54 in some cases where we need to, because the ad agency has been focused on 25 to 54 for half a century. There is a lot of dollars on the table. There's a lot of people over 50 who have a lot of predisposable income, have a lot of money to spend, but advertisers, they're beyond 25 to 54. So look beyond that. We just launched a station yesterday in Kelowna, BC, where every other format, radio music format, is covered except the 70s. And so we're a 70s hit station, and it's going to attract people over 50. And we don't care how well it does in ratings, because we know we can sell it locally. And I know this whole conversation is tactics and strategies for youth. The third one is, for me, other than hire talent, look beyond 25 to 54. And this is really building on what Tapas said, which is adopt a strategy that includes the hosts not only on the radio, but in every other platform.
Thanks. Tapas?
Yeah, so I would just say that, in fact, first point by Carolyn as well as Ross is my point as well. You know that you have to focus on content. The only additional point I'd like to make is that let content be your starting point and not the platform. Once you have great content, then you decide how much of it goes on radio. How much do you want to lead with radio? Do you want to lead with social media? Do you want to lead with a personal handle? So and that really makes the content blossom. Something which is so well made for the grammar of social media may not go down well on radio, but as a continuing and a supporting medium to that conversation happening on social media, radio can be a great medium. So that's the first thing that I would really like to suggest. The second is, of course, that for recruitment, it doesn't matter whether you like the person or not. I think if the person is a runaway success in terms of stories, which Ross just spoke about, in terms of, again, good content, take that person, let that person be on air. You'll be surprised how listeners now no more care for a great voice, that baritone, that classic baritone. I think it's gone. So it doesn't matter. You have a guy with a squeaky voice and that guy is supremely successful. So who am I to judge? Yeah, largely these 2 points I'd really like to make.
Gary, you're muted.
Did your government do that to you, Gary?
Gary, you're muted.
You're muted, Gary.
So are you, Omar.
So's Omar. Would you like us to close this off?
That is ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I'm so sorry about that. But I just took my cue from Gary, I guess. But I don't know why you don't want to say anything more. But let's just thank you so much, all of you, for this session. And I want to tell Andrew that it's great that he brought up this point about recruitment. The recruitment process is very weak in some markets, maybe in all markets, we don't know. But it's one of the areas that the content managers and program managers we were talking to around the world said they absolutely wanted to engage on. And so that's what's going to be the Global Online Content Series, episode 3, which is on the 8th of May. It is entirely about recruitment strategies to bring the best and the brightest. When I was a young person working in campus radio at university, I had this was the ultimate thing for me to do was get onto radio. That's not the case for most young people anymore. It's very low on the consideration set. And that's probably because of what we've done to radio, perhaps. Or it might be because they're more excited by other options and opportunities. So how do we get that right? That's going to be what we're going to talk about in the Global Online Content Series number 3. So mark it in your diaries. That's happening on Wednesday, May 8th. But firstly, just on this panel, really want to thank all of you. It was tremendous. There were lots of amazing learnings. Just fabulous to hear how different markets are dealing with the challenge and the great ideas that have come from all of you. So really valuable to everybody. And thank you so much. Those of you who missed it or you thought it was really amazing and you wish that more of the people who work with you were able to see it and they weren't able to, remember this is available on catch up on redtech.pro. So you can watch the entire thing again. And I think you're probably going to want to, because you might want to take notes from some of the insights and inputs that came in for the discussion. You can see all the comments coming in right now. People like Mayur, who didn't ask any questions, but they were clearly getting a lot of value out of this. So lovely to see all of you. And most importantly, this would not have been possible without SoundStack. SoundStack, thank you for supporting this particular panel. Look forward to seeing all of you that are watching again for the May 8th Global Online Content Series. Gary will be back with a brand new panel to talk about it. Tapas, you already gave some really good insights. All of you did on the topic. I don't know why Gary introduced it here, but I'm glad he did because it teased something that everybody is compelled by. And we will be discussing it at length on Wednesday, May 8th. Thank you again, everybody. It was tremendous having you all here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.